A tiny piece of bone, no bigger than a fingertip, rests quietly in a sterile clean room. Yet it holds enough power to rewrite the entire story of our own origins. This story doesn't truly begin on some brutal ancient battlefield or within a magnificent cave. No, it starts right here, in a pressure-controlled room where scientists fully clad in protective gear work in silence. On that metal tray, an artifact lies ready. It's about to shatter every preconception we hold about the history of Homo sapiens. For decades, reading the genome of an extinct human species was a wild, impossible dream. Scientists simply assumed it couldn't be done. DNA isn't like rock. It's a fragile, organic molecule. Over time, it degrades. Much like ink fading on a page, buried underground for 40,000 years. What's left are often just fragmented, meaningless letters. The challenge wasn't just the erosion of time. A far greater enemy was contamination. This ancient bone sample was never an intact time capsule. Instead, it was a messy crime scene. It was filled with the DNA of bacteria, fungi, and even worse, the DNA of the archaeologists, museum staff, or lab technicians themselves. People who had inadvertently touched it or simply breathed nearby. These foreign genetic codes screamed out, drowning the faint whispers of the past. But Swedish geneticist Svante Pääbo and his colleagues refused to give up. They spent decades developing extreme methods to extract ancient human genes. Methods that could transform those shattered genetic fragments into something readable, into a coherent text. Those tireless efforts paid off. In 2022, Svante Pääbo was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for his revolutionary discoveries in evolutionary genetics. He had done the impossible. He sequenced the Neanderthal genome. The award also recognized another astonishing discovery: clear evidence of gene transfer. Segments of DNA had moved from these extinct hominins into Homo sapiens. This happened right after our ancestors began their great journey out of Africa. A big question immediately emerges. If all the fossils tell us that Neanderthals completely vanished, then why does the genetic code whisper something else? Why does it suggest that a small part of them still lives on, right inside us? Fossils show us they once lived, but Neanderthal DNA proves they never truly left this story. Their genetic legacy remains. That tiny piece of bone has forced us to rewrite history. It proves that the truth isn't just buried beneath rocks and soil. No. It's also flowing in the very veins of billions of people alive today. When our Homo sapiens ancestors took their first steps out of the warm cradle of Africa, they moved into the icy, unfamiliar lands of West Asia and Europe. But they didn't step into an empty world. not a blank stage waiting for the main act. Instead, they encountered their distant cousins, the Neanderthals, who had been the established inhabitants for hundreds of thousands of years. This fateful encounter is often painted by popular culture in broad strokes, either overly romantic or brutally violent. People imagine tragic cross-species love affairs or bloody, destructive wars. But the truth revealed by evolutionary genetics paints a more complex picture, more ordinary, and perhaps far more profound. It was contact between two human populations. They shared a distant common ancestry, different enough to recognize each other's existence, yet close enough for interactions to arise. They might have competed for food in a valley, or silently avoided each other across mountain ranges. Perhaps they exchanged stone tools, or simply observed one another from a distance. And within that diverse chain of interactions, there were certainly instances of interbreeding. A groundbreaking study, like a beam of light cutting through a foggy past, was published in Nature in 2024. By analyzing ancient human genomes from very early Homo sapiens individuals found in Ranis Cave and Zloty Cave, scientists uncovered undeniable evidence. This evidence isn't just speculation. It's a clear genetic fingerprint, pinpointing the precise timing of this admixture. The data revealed that the Neanderthal DNA segments in these early modern humans all stemmed from a single, shared hybridization event. Scientists were able to pinpoint that moment. They estimate it occurred between 45,000 and 49,000 years ago. This marks an incredibly important milestone, one now etched onto the timeline of Homo sapiens history. Reuters, in summarizing a series of genetic studies that same year, also emphasized something crucial. This was no fleeting random event. The period of interbreeding between the two species may have extended over many generations, with the peak of interaction occurring around 47,000 years ago. Children of mixed heritage were born. They grew up. They struggled to survive through the harsh winters of the Ice Age. And most importantly, they continued to pass on that mixed genome to successive generations, gradually dissolving the Neanderthal genetic legacy into the vast, ever-expanding gene pool of Homo sapiens across the planet. This proves that evolution isn't a series of parallel lines that never intersect. It's an intricate network of convergent events, where previously separate streams once again merge, creating populations with new strengths for survival. Human history isn't just written in sharp stone tools, or in the deep cave paintings, or even footprints etched in volcanic ash. Sometimes history is written in ancient gene segments, tiny codes that have miraculously remained, surviving tens of thousands of years of time's relentless erosion. One of the most famous and frequently cited figures in discussions about evolutionary genetics is the 1 to 2%. It's a small number, yet it unlocks a forgotten chapter in the history of Homo sapiens. It tells us that many modern humans of non-African descent carry approximately 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. Data from reputable systems like Medline Plus Genetics makes this clear. People with European or Asian ancestry typically possess this genetic legacy. Meanwhile, for many indigenous African populations where early Homo sapiens groups never encountered Neanderthals, this figure is nearly zero. This data acts like a geographical map of the past, charting our ancestors' one-way journey out of the cradle continent. But history is never a straight line. The picture of evolutionary genetics is far more complex, with reverse migrations back into Africa, inadvertently carrying these hybrid gene fragments. This created a continually interwoven genetic tapestry across generations. And this is where a critical misunderstanding often arises. The 1 to 2% figure does not mean you have a block of cells or an entire body part that is Neanderthal. That's simply not the case. The truth is far more subtle. Imagine the original Neanderthal genome as a long, continuous thread. But with each generation, as parental DNA recombines to create a new individual, a cold, biological editor cuts and shuffles that thread. After thousands of generations, that original thread has been fragmented into countless tiny pieces. This 1 to 2% isn't an intact block. Instead, they are minuscule genetic shards scattered like stardust across the vast length of your own vast genome. A report in the journal Nature from 2014 calculated that the Neanderthal DNA segments we carry are typically smaller than 100 kilobases. They are just short segments of code because the long storm of time has been sufficient to break down any large connected sequences. Imagine this genetic legacy as a great ancient book containing the entire story of the Neanderthals. That book has been torn into millions of fragments by a 40,000-year storm of time. Each of us today happens to pick up and retain a few different fragments. No two people possess the exact same pieces, and no single individual holds the entire content of that book. But here is the marvel of modern science. As supercomputers synthesize and piece together ancient human genetic data from millions of people worldwide, we can begin to glimpse the outline of that book. We can't read it in its entirety, but we can identify crucial chapters, sentences that have shaped our immune systems, our skin, and even our predispositions to certain diseases. We can prove that such a book truly existed. A gene segment, shorter than a mere scratch on the vast map of the human genome, holds enough power to prove that two human species once met, lived alongside each other, and shared the most fundamental essence of life. This 1 to 2% figure doesn't turn any of us into a Neanderthal. But it's enough to shatter an outdated perspective, proving that Homo sapiens was never a solitary, pure bloodline on its journey. We are a symphony composed of many currents, and that is a truth more beautiful than any tale of purity. For decades, popular culture has inadvertently sown a deep-seated prejudice. The image of Neanderthals has often been associated with sluggishness, clumsiness, and inferiority. This led many to mistakenly believe that carrying ancient genes within us was a biological burden, a useless relic left over from our evolutionary journey. But modern genetic science has completely overturned that perspective. What seemed like faded ink marks of the past, those genetic codes, actually turned out to be lifelines. They helped our Homo sapiens ancestors survive as they first ventured into completely unfamiliar environments. Imagine the Great Migration out of Africa. Our ancestors left behind their familiar tropical climate to face extreme survival challenges. These were the harsh, icy winters of the north, different intensities of ultraviolet radiation, and entirely new food sources. Even more dangerous, though, was the lurking threat of pathogens, types of disease their immune systems had never encountered before. In this struggle for survival, the genetic legacy from Neanderthals became a secret weapon. In 2014, the journal Nature published a groundbreaking discovery. Scientists found that certain regions in the modern human genome had an unusually high concentration of Neanderthal DNA. What was astonishing was that these were closely linked to keratin, a core protein forming the outer layer of our skin and the structure of our hair. This was no random coincidence. Natural selection's decision to keep these genes strongly suggested they offered an advantage. These ancient genetic codes may have helped Homo sapiens develop thicker skin and tougher hair. They acted like a biological coat, helping the body better withstand the biting cold of the Ice Age and the physical impacts of the harsh environments outside Africa. The story didn't stop with skin and hair. A comprehensive review in Nature Reviews Genetics in 2015 painted an even broader picture of this phenomenon of adaptive introgression. The paper showed that genes from these ancient people were consistently retained because they were directly linked to resistance against local pathogens, the ability to metabolize energy in low-temperature conditions, and adaptation to entirely new diets across the Eurasian continent. Neanderthals had lived and evolved in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years before our ancestors arrived. They paid a significant evolutionary price to harmonize their genome with that land. And Homo sapiens, in a way, took an incredibly clever biological shortcut. Through interbreeding, we absorbed the very adaptations that Neanderthals had spent a long history developing. However, we need to pause here to understand a core principle of evolutionary genetics. Not every piece of Neanderthal DNA within us provides an absolute benefit. Their influence isn't some kind of superpower. The human environment is constantly changing. A gene variant that was once an excellent biological coat in the cold ice age might become neutral or even a disadvantage in the modern world. Today, with heaters and sterile food, an immune system that's too sensitive, inherited to fight ancient pathogens, could actually increase the risk of autoimmune diseases. The past is always a double-edged sword. A gene segment inherited from ancient people might have been an invaluable gift tens of thousands of years ago, but it isn't necessarily a perfect advantage for the human body in the rhythm of the 21st century. Our genetic legacy is part of the story, but it's not the whole story. The modern human body isn't a perfectly engineered machine designed from the ground up. Sometimes it's more like a museum without walls, quietly preserving fragments of the past that its very owner is unaware of. Those ancient gene fragments scattered throughout our bodies aren't just lying dormant like inert biological fossils. No, they are still active. They're still coding for proteins, subtly influencing how the body responds to everyday survival threats, everything from a common cold to century-defying pandemics. To truly grasp this intricate influence, there's no more vivid or timely example than the COVID-19 pandemic. This global health disaster inadvertently awakened gene segments that had been dormant for tens of thousands of years, placing them squarely on the scales of life and death. This was the stage where our genetic legacy would be tested most severely. In 2020, a groundbreaking study by Zeeberg and Svante Pääbo himself, later published in the prestigious journal Nature, uncovered a troubling fact. A cluster of genes located on chromosome number 3, directly inherited from Neanderthals, was closely linked to a higher risk of developing severe acute respiratory syndrome upon infection with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. This discovery initially shocked the public. It created the sense that the Neanderthal legacy was a biological curse from the past, an outdated code dragging down Homo sapiens' survival against a completely new virus of the modern era. The history of Homo sapiens seemed, once again, haunted by its own ancient encounters. But the story of Neanderthal DNA is never as simple as a movie with clear-cut good and evil. Just 1 year later, another study presented a completely opposite perspective. Scientists discovered a variant within the OAS1 gene cluster, also originating from Neanderthals themselves, acted as a silent guardian. It provided a powerful protective mechanism, significantly reducing both the risk of infection and the severity of COVID-19. The stark contrast in these two examples vividly proves that we cannot use a moral lens to judge DNA. There is no such thing as a good or bad Neanderthal gene. There are only biological codes interacting blindly with their surroundings, producing different results depending on the context they face. This is the very essence of evolutionary genetics. What's more, this isn't a story where one gene dictates destiny. The risk of facing illness is also governed by a host of other factors: age, living environment, the gut microbiome, vaccination history, and access to healthcare systems. Genetic heritage is merely one chapter in the book of each person's health. The past never truly stays in the past. Sometimes it reaches out an invisible hand across tens of thousands of years, appearing as a molecular sequence. It helps determine how your immune system will fight a newly formed virus of today. But if these ancient gene fragments truly were a genetic gift, a weapon handed down by history to help us combat disease, then a logical question immediately arises in the quiet of the lab. If they were so useful, why does that legacy survive only as fragments? Why do they make up just a tiny 1 to 2% of our genome today? Why wasn't history more generous? The answer lies in the core nature of biological compatibility. It's an invisible contract inadvertently broken by two human species, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Not every piece from the Neanderthal genome could fit neatly into our complex biological machinery. Imagine two rivers, separated from a common source, flowing in different directions for hundreds of thousands of years. Their currents were shaped by distinct landscapes, climates, and unique challenges. When these two rivers suddenly met again, their waters mingled. But the silt and minerals they carried weren't always compatible. They clashed. The evolutionary journeys of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were much the same. After immense periods of separation, each species had developed its own independent genetic structures. When interbreeding occurred, the combination of these unfamiliar gene sets often led to detrimental consequences. These included errors in transcription and, most importantly, a reduction in the fertility of hybrid offspring. A major study published in the journal Nature in 2014 revealed a stark truth about humanity's genetic map. Neanderthal DNA wasn't scattered evenly like stardust across our chromosomes. Instead, there were vast blank spaces, barren regions that scientists dubbed Neanderthal deserts. These genetic deserts, particularly on the X chromosome and in gene clusters active in male testes, were almost entirely devoid of ancient human traces. This systematic absence was no accident. It was powerful evidence that, in the past, natural selection had intervened ruthlessly. Neanderthal gene fragments that caused male infertility in hybrids, an evolutionary dead end, were quickly purged and eliminated. Natural selection acted to ensure the survival and reproductive potential of the entire population. We can imagine evolution as an invisible editor, cold and unforgiving. This editor constantly reviews humanity's genetic manuscript, generation after generation. He only allows a few words, a few short passages truly useful for survival to remain. The rest he ruthlessly strikes out and tosses into the waste bin. Entire chapters that are out of sync, incompatible. What remains, finally, is a draft we call Modern Homo Sapiens, a work that will forever be incomplete. Our bodies are intensely pragmatic. They are not obligated to retain everything from the past simply for nostalgia's sake. Evolution is a continuous process of purification. What ultimately survives isn't what's most original, but what functions most smoothly in the present reality. When genetic science lifted the veil on this 1 to 2% of foreign DNA, it inadvertently touched a sensitive boundary. A boundary between biology and philosophy. It forces us to redefine a concept so familiar it's almost a cliché: extinction. Morphologically, demographically, and historically, there is absolutely no debate. Neanderthals did indeed become extinct as a distinct biological population, a living entity with an independent community structure. Their disappearance is a fact etched deep into the geological record. They no longer had communities living in caves where their voices and laughter once echoed. They no longer retained their characteristic Mousterian stone tool culture, those stone fragments bearing the imprint of a vanished intelligence. Their robust body form, with its prominent brow ridge, was completely erased from the visible world. And their independent history ceased permanently around 40,000 years ago. They are truly gone. Yet, this disappearance at the population level directly contradicts microscopic biological evidence, evidence quietly flowing within each of our cells. The presence of Neanderthal DNA in the modern human genome raises a thought-provoking question. If a species is completely erased from the physical world outside, but billions of its genetic fragments are still actively functioning within the genome of another species, is that extinction truly an absolute end? We shouldn't push this discussion too far, not into abstract philosophical realms, nor mystical spirituality. The essence of the matter must remain firmly grounded in harsh scientific reality. This is not a rebirth, nor is it the intact continuation of the will or spirit of the ancients. These gene segments do not carry memories or consciousness. In essence, this is a scattered genetic legacy, an extreme dilution where the organisms of the past simply dissolve into the colossal current of the present. They are like an ancient drop of ink falling into the ocean, leaving only the faintest echo through the molecular codes: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. The Neanderthal legacy is merely a molecular ghost. But no matter how faint, this genetic evidence has forever shattered the classic image of humanity's evolutionary family tree. We once believed that evolutionary branches always separated completely, sprouting in different directions, never meeting again, like parallel roads with no intersections. Biological reality proves humanity's evolutionary tree is more like a tangled, intertwined bush. Branches that had separated could bend, intertwine unexpectedly, exchanging biological nutrients. These are precious gene segments. Before one branch gradually withered, unable to adapt, while the other continued to grow stronger, reaching for the sunlight. The history of Homo sapiens is not a straight line. It's a complex network of encounters and separations. Neanderthals have vanished forever from the cold steppes of the Ice Age. They have departed from the deep stone caves of Europe. From the flickering firelight they themselves kindled in the dark night. But in the silence of DNA, within our very bodies, they still leave behind an unfinished sentence in humanity's great book. The tiny bone fragment in the sterile lab finally told its story. It closed an astonishing scientific chapter, confirming a new truth. Homo sapiens are not, after all, the pure bloodline we proudly believed ourselves to be. We are a complex symphony, a product of endless migrations, of encounters and interbreeding, and of the relentless culling of natural selection. The 1 to 2% genetic legacy from Neanderthal DNA explains how our bodies adapted, how our skin changed, how our white blood cells fight. But with archaic genes, what was found isn't as important as what survived. And even if we can read the entire genetic map, it's still only half the answer. Every animal has DNA. Neanderthals had large brains and robust bodies. So why did only Homo sapiens rise to dominate the biosphere, build megacities, and split the atom? If our triumph wasn't due to biological purity, then what truly set Homo sapiens' history on a different path? The answer isn't in cortical folds or immune proteins. It's hidden in the explosion of language, the power of symbols, and the strange ability that allows millions of strangers to believe in things that don't exist in the physical world. Their legacy is still here, in our gene sequence, in the profound questions about human nature. The answer isn't in cortical folds or immune proteins. It's hidden in the explosion of language, the power of symbols, and the strange ability that allows millions of strangers to believe in things that don't exist in the physical world. Their legacy is still here, in our gene sequence, in the profound questions about human nature. We carry within us the gene fragments of an extinct human species. How do you feel about that? DNA structure tells us where we came from, how our bodies are built, but it can't explain the invisible force that has brought us so far. In the next episode, we'll temporarily set aside the biological story to delve into the cognitive revolution, the moment the Homo sapiens mind ignited and forever changed this planet. The story of the body may have temporarily concluded, but the grand story of the mind is only just beginning.